Well, this is Ed Stetzer Live, and of course, this and every Saturday at this time, or really any time if you're listening via podcast, we come to you live with some really helpful, hopeful conversations, and I think that today is going to be one of those conversations. And of course, I'm Ed Stetzer. I'm the Dean of the Talbot School of Theology. Fun fact, our guest is a graduate of Biola University, one of the other schools of Biola, but also took some classes at the Talbot School of Theology. So I don't know, people like guessing now, who is this guest? And he's well known, but you might not even know the connection to Biola, but it's kind of super fun. But I'm glad today to be with you and host you each and every week at this time. Remember, you can subscribe to this as a podcast at any point by going to edstetzerlive.com. All the links to today's program, the book we're going to talk about, information about the author, are all easiest to find at edstetzerlive.com. Now, I should say, we're actually pre-recording this program, and so we're not able to take your calls, but that gives us more time with the guest, and so it's going to be a great conversation. And our guest today is the one and only Dr. Henry Cloud. He's an acclaimed leadership expert, clinical psychologist, New York Times bestselling author, 46 books, including the iconic book Boundaries, which I used all the time. It has sold nearly 20 million copies worldwide. He has an extensive executive coaching background and experience as a leadership consultant, devoting the majority of his time working with CEOs, leadership teams, and executives to improve performance, leadership skills, and culture. And this is actually a devotional book. This is a new devotional book, which kind of, Dr. Cloud, first, welcome to the program. We are glad you're here. But I'm just kind of interested how Henry Cloud got into writing a devotional. This is not your normal lane, my brother. Tell us about it.
You know, one of the things that I believe most is everybody ought to stay in their lane, right?
But here we are.
Here we are. Came across the median there. Well, it's kind of a story a little bit. Last year I wrote a book called Why I Believe, and that book was basically, I'm a believer and I have a lot of friends that aren't, and they always say or kind of look at me askew and say, they know I'm one of those weirdos, but in today's context, it's with some people, it's hard to talk about faith. It gets so divisive, and if you're a Christian, they assume you're 50 other things, and so it's difficult. But I really wanted some way to talk to my friends. So I said, I'm going to write this down, and it was going to be a little pamphlet, but then it turned into a book. It's really about my faith journey, and Moses said, tell them this when they ask you. We were slaves in Egypt. God brought us out with a mighty hand with signs and wonders. And then he gave us these ways so that we would follow him, and that would be our righteousness, and we would always prosper. And that's kind of my story. I was in Egypt, metaphorically. I was, I hit bottom and was really, really depressed in college, and reached out to God, and he showed up in some miraculous ways, and then he taught me a bunch of stuff that healed me, and that's my story. So I wrote that book, and then we started talking about it, and like all of us, your faith development is a journey, and you go through, it's a process, and the way that people grow, the way people change, the way people get well, that's a process. And so we thought, well, why don't we make a little tool where little bite-sized chunks every day, and I mean bite-sized, they're very, they're only a little page a day, to take people to hopefully knowing God better and healing a lot of things that ail them.
Yeah, I'm a super big fan of devotions. I think they help to shape us, consistency, the daily habit, and more. So I was kind of excited when I saw that you had a devotional. We had you on last year. We'll make sure that we put this in the show notes. So if you go to edstetzerlive.com, we had Henry on last year to talk about his book that kind of shared his faith. I mean, it was a kind of a beautiful gospel invitation, and I love that because, again, you are known there are few folks that have sort of, I don't know what the right term is. I think about like in music, like you were Christian music and then you went mainstream. So you were not Christian music, but you were, you're this psychologist, and then you kind of like people read and know your work that are people of faith and people of no faith. So I thought it was kind of brave and bold. I loved last year, and now leaning into this space more, I think, is great. And this is more, if I could be honest, blunt, it's kind of more personal to you here as well. You've got some personal things kind of in this journey. Talked about bringing your, I don't know, full self into this book in ways that I think are unusual compared to, so you have a bit of a detachment, professional detachment sometimes when you write. You're not in this case.
Oh gosh, there was just no other way to do it, Ed. And I could talk about God and all these great concepts, that we all know, and the apologetics and the reasons and all this, but I was like the guy that Jesus healed, and he came back and he didn't know anything. He said, "Well, who is this? And tell us about it." And he goes, "Look, I don't know. I was blind, and now I can see." And I couldn't talk about God without telling my story. And so as I got into it, I just, I just said, well, here it all is. And in fact, I had people, I sent, as I was writing it, I would send the manuscript to a few people to read. And it was interesting because several people knew me during that time period who read it. And they said, gosh, I never knew that it was that bad, that you were suffering that much. And I said, well, here's the story. So here we go. I didn't leave anything out.
You did not. You laid it in there, which again, I think it is kind of fascinating because, I mean, so many of us have interacted with your work and maybe not known some of the context or some of the backgrounds. I think that's a gift. I think it's not for every book. It shouldn't be in every book, but I think it's a gift in a context like this. You've got sort of, it's interesting because the theme sort of, it's this devotional style. You kind of blend emotional health, spiritual formation, biblical discipleship, and then relational neuroscience. So we probably are familiar with those other categories, but talk a little bit about relational neuroscience in the context of this.
Oh gosh, Ed, you're a theologian, and you've seen this. I was when I first came to faith in college, I had been recruited to play golf in college, and that was my whole life. And then I had an injury and couldn't play anymore, and I hit bottom, and I was really depressed, and I was trying to, get out of it. And I had come to faith in a deeper way, and so I just devoured theology, and I used to, when I first went to college, I'd end classes at 12 and go to the golf course because, the team had practice every day. Well, I started ending class at 12, and I'd drive to Dallas Seminary and into the library. This is before you could Google everything. And I just fell in love with theology. And so I love theology. But as you know, sometimes our paradigms and systematic theology and all of that almost becomes a pair of glasses that we read the Bible through. And you kind of it's like a cookie cutter. You might miss some of the dough that doesn't fit exactly in that lens. And so when I was, going through all of my training as a psychologist and learning actually how people change and how people grow and how we're formed and all of that, there's just no getting around it, that relationship is everything. I mean, it's the Bible from Genesis 1 to the end, that God is relational and he wants a relationship with us. But past that, if you look at the ways that we grow and heal and change and get stronger and get better and perform better and become more like him, you go through the entire New Testament, and the methodology are certainly the things that our Christian traditions talk about, being in the Word and prayer and Bible study and memorizing Scripture. But you can't get away from it throughout the New Testament. Like Ephesians 4 says, that the whole body, joined and connected together with all its joints and sinews, heals itself as each part does its work. And you go to 1 Peter, and it talks about as we use our gifts with one another and are loving one another and speaking the very words of God, it says that we are administering the grace of God to each other in its various forms. And you have all these one another's. And I started to look at, the processes by which people overcome depression, anxiety, addictions, trauma, all this stuff. And clinically, you've always got at the core of it, you've got a connection that has to fuel that with God and with other people. And then I started looking at the scriptures, and the lights went on in this weird way that everything that science says, you talk about the neuroscience of it, and we can get into specifics of that, but everything it says, that's exactly the process the New Testament and the entire scriptures talk about. And it just became, it's sort of like, call it a hermeneutic, if you will. When you look at the scriptures through a relational lens, it's amazing. It's amazing the way that God has designed us and what he tells us to do. So that's kind of the background on it. But then you get into the science, and now I'm probably going on too long here with this answer, but
I'm interested.
It's crazy how the last section of the book, or towards the end, I talk about how the science of psychology proved the Bible to me. And, when I first went into this, psychologists were being railed on by, a lot of big pastors and stuff, secular humanists and all this kind of stuff. But the scriptures are clear. The creation screams the glory of God. And God, and Jesus used metaphors of stories about human dynamics and all of this. And when you get into the neuroscience of it and the anatomy and the physiology of how we actually change, it just proves the Bible over and over and over and over and over. I'll give you one quick example. Everything we know about healing trauma, for example, or healing what psychologists call complicated bereavement, losses that turn into depression, and they get stuck. And then, what happens? Well, you get into a group or you go see a good therapist and you process this and all this pain comes out, and voila, you get well, and well, isn't science amazing? They discovered all this stuff. Well, sort of. I mean, you go back to Solomon said in Ecclesiastes, he says that sorrow is better than laughter. He says the wise person is wiser to go into the house of mourning than the house of pleasure. And get this line: for a sad face can make a heart happy. Well, what does that mean? Well, a lot of people try to medicate their pain by going to the house of pleasure, porn addictions, substance abuse, one more sexual experience. And then what happens? They get out of control. They go into treatment or therapy or a group or whatever. They got to sit in the circle, and then they got to start going into the house of mourning. They got to start processing their pain. And as Solomon says, then, well, your heart will be happy if you go to the death before the resurrection. If you go into the pain, you'll come out better. Okay, so that's what the scripture says. Well, now we can hook somebody up to a brain scan. And what we know is that trauma and pain gets stuck and it's got to be processed. But you hook somebody up to a brain scan, and all this stuff is stuck in the limbic system and in the hippocampus staining that happens when trauma happens with cortisol, staining that memory. And so it can't move and it's stuck there. Well, when somebody else looks into their eyes and is very compassionate and very empathic, and they're expressing that pain, but their pain is seen by another person, the brain starts to light up. It's like Drano. It starts to move from one side of the brain to the other, and it gets processed. And then what happens? It's flushed out through these little tear ducts in your eyes. Now, why did God put your tear ducts in your eyes instead of under your arm where you can spray some antiperspirant and nobody ever knows you're sad? Because he wants our pain to be seen by somebody else so it can be healed. And we can see that in science. So all of these things that the scriptures talk about I always say it's almost like whoever wrote the Bible understood the brain. It's incredible. The science validates the scriptures over and over and over.
Fascinating, fascinating. Okay, we're going to continue our conversation with Henry Cloud in just a moment. Mind you, we're not taking your calls because we've pre-recorded today, but you can get the book. It's already out. It's To Know Him, a 90-day invitation to come to God as you are. It's kind of different from Henry Cloud. I think you'll like it. It's called To Know Him, a 90-day invitation to come to God as you are. We're going to continue our conversation about the book, about what it means to come to God. That's my first question coming back, is how do we come to God as we are? So stay with us. We're going to continue our conversation with Henry Cloud in just a moment. Okay, we're back. Ed Stetzer Live. I'm Ed Stetzer. We're actually not taking your calls today. We're having a great conversation with the one, the only Dr. Henry Cloud. His new book is a devotional. It's a 90-day devotional, and the title is To Know Him, a 90-day invitation to come to God as you are. Just before the break, we were talking about some issues around neuroscience. Fascinating conversation about, some things. I learned some things in those last few minutes as well. Let's talk about the whole theme, the whole premise of your book is to come to God. And you kind of talk about, coming to God as you are, removing obstacles like shame, fear, isolation. So how do you do that? Like, I would say, to me, first of all, that sounds really easy. There's a song, come as you are to worship. But I think it's really, it's a complex beast sometimes to come to God as you are. Why is that so important? How do we do that?
Well, Ed, you're the master theologian here. And you know that when we fell, we were created, that God was the source of life. He's the source of everything. He made us. Not only did he make us, he sustains us. And then what happened in Genesis was we disconnected from the source. And original sin is a lot of things, but one of them is it's our wish to be God, that we could be self-sufficient without him. That goes to every cell in our being, that we don't even think about it, but we operate as if we are the start. We have to do everything. We have to earn our way to God. We have to work ourselves out of every single thing. But that's not the way we're designed. And when you talk about coming to God, we have such, we replace relationship with religion. And so we're religious beings. And so we come to God, and at some level, we don't even know it, that we think, I come to God, I gotta be better. I gotta do this right. I gotta say it the right way. And there's some sort of step that we feel like that there's something we got to do to get in the door, and we forget that the scriptures from A to Z say that God comes to us. We're unable. Blessed are the poor in spirit. And a lot of people, it's so difficult at the deepest core of their being, this thing called trust. And throughout the scriptures, trust is what drives everything. And you go to the Psalms, and David says, God, you taught me to trust you at my mother's breast. You don't have a baby saying, what do I need to do, to get what I need? And what, they're not going through any formula. They are just becoming 100% dependent. And this thing called trust that God's wired us to do begins to be the mechanism. And so it's very important, whatever we're dealing with in any moment of any day, that it begins with a letting go and coming to him just like you are. It's weird. It's almost like somebody, trying to take a shower before they go take a bath. I got to clean myself up before I go get cleaned up. No, it doesn't work that way. It starts with God's going to be the one that gives us the original shower. Whatever it is, we got to let go. And it doesn't mean let go and let God. It's not like we don't have to do stuff, but the first step is we have to come just like you are. And I tell non-believers, I was talking to a guy on the plane about this the other night, and I said, look, you can do this right now. And he says, well, I don't know, I got to think. I said, no, you all you got to do is what I did. And I walked down to an aisle, or down the aisle in an empty chapel when I was in college, and literally it hit bottom. I said, God, I don't know if you're there or not, really, but I need help. If you're there, show me, call me. And you just have to come. And this could be a believer that's been walking with the Lord for 25 years and is in a business meeting and is stuck. You should be inside, and those, you're doing those negotiations. Inside, God, help me, show me, Lord, give me the words. This is supposed to be an abiding, moment by moment life. We're supposed to live like the vine and the branch. This connection that starts with Him, and our inviting Him into whatever mood or whatever. You might even hate God at the moment. Good. Ask Him to come into your hatred and help you. You might have doubt. Ask it. He did that with Thomas. Come into my doubt. You've got to it starts with coming as you are.
Yeah, so good. And you coming as you are, you kind of make this connection between, it's about connection rather than isolation. And how do we, and you talk about how both with God and God's people. So we live in a world, Henry, that is very driven by isolating people. Social media is I just think social media is killing us. And it's, isolating us to our phones. I was taking a train the other day, and, every person on the phone wasn't looking at anyone next to them. They're just looking down on their phone. And I don't know, it's almost like something in a movie. Like you would kind of like have these aliens come in and take everyone's brains, and we're all looking at this phone. In a world that really, I think, actually promotes isolation, you're instead calling to connection to God and God's people. So why are those connections so central to our spiritual formation and growth?
Well, think of everybody's had the experience. Well, not now, because we've been at this for a long time. But when computers first started taking over, how many people would call the helpline, say this thing's not working? I hit this and hit this, and the first question they would always ask, well, is it plugged in?
Right. And it was so funny because you're like, of course, but then it happens all the time. Yeah.
Yep. Did I turn it on? And when the connection, we forget we're not the creator. We're the created being. God is the only one who does not need anything outside of himself. Nothing to be all of who he is. Because he's the creator. We are the created beings. So literally, Ed, from the moment you are conceived, everything has got to come from the outside that you need from the moment you're conceived. And what happens is, you look at it 9 months later, that baby comes out and they snip that cord, and that baby gives one of the deepest theological truths right in front of us, reveals it, shows us what hell looks like. Jesus said hell will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. And that baby is like, wah, wah, wah. Oh, what is that face? That's the face of hell. Because for 9 months, they've been in connected, trusting, dependent environment with the mother. And all of a sudden, they're separated from life for the first time. And that's hell. And the way that is restored, and God built oxytocin and mirror neurons and all these processes that when that baby is invited back into that connection, it starts to download everything that it needs. We have babies that are, they're raised in institutions, orphans, and they're fed and watered, but they aren't loved. They don't have that emotional, spiritual, relational connection. If they don't have that, you keep feeding them and water them, they grow, but their brain sizes are smaller, their immune systems don't work, They have lower intelligence later. They have behavior problems where circuitry hardwiring didn't grow in the brain because of the absence of this connection. And that goes through all the way from the womb to the tomb. You take people in nursing homes that have heart attacks and strokes, you put them in two groups. One of them has a support system where they're connected and processing their illness, and the other group doesn't. The other group has 3-4 times higher second instances of heart attack and stroke because of the absence of relationship. And this goes all the way through. We download everything we need from relationship. That's how your brain develops, how your body develops. It's how you learn language. It's how everything comes through a connection.
Well, hold on with us. We're going to continue our conversation with Henry Cloud, hear more about this, and I've got some follow-up questions as well. Stay with us on Existential Live. All right, we're back. Super excited to have Dr. Henry Cloud, the one and the only Dr. Henry Cloud. His books and my books together have sold over 20 million copies. I thought you should know that together we've passed that milestone now. That was kind of a joke that hopefully you get that joke. But anyway, so his books have sold over 20 million copies. So together we have. But his newest book, we were joking earlier that this is a new lane for him. But this is after his book last year, which I really enjoyed. And again, if you go to existentiallive.com, we did a whole radio review on that. Encourage you to get a copy of that. Kind of a spiritual kind of journey and inviting his friends. I love evangelism, and I love people who are unapologetic about talking about their faith as well, particularly when they're in such a space as Henry Cloud is, where people in the secular context and around the world know him. Henry, I'm trying to pull up the title of the book. What was the title of the book last year?
It was called Why I Believe. And the subtitle kind of tells it. It says, a psychologist's thoughts on suffering, miracles, science, and faith, because that was kind of my journey.
Love that. Again, it's called Why I Believe. Again, go to existentiallive.com. It's linked there. The book we're talking about today is his newest book. It's just out a couple of months ago. It's called To Know Him, a 90-day invitation to come to God as you are. Now, I know that there's a lot of like 90-day things. You got 40-day things, you got 90-day things. But I actually, first of all, I'm a big believer in 90-day things. I think they reshape our brains. But I'm interested, as Dr. Henry Cloud, psychologist, would say, why a 90-day invitation? What's the thinking in something like that?
Oh gosh, well there is thinking, and then there's not, in a way. As you know, Ed, we change and we grow in a process. Now, there are things that happen instantaneously, but a lot of times you see the instantaneous in the scriptures, you'll see a process described afterwards. For example, when Jesus talked about, well, you can have a deliverance, but when that demon goes out, if you don't fill up the house and clean up the house, then he's going to come back with 7 more of his buddies. And the New Testament and the Old Testament, God told him to, go capture the land. He said, you can't do it all at once. You got to take it step by step, because you got to get strong enough with each step to be able to handle what's going to come next. Everything, all this growth stuff is a process. It's grace and truth over time. And the process elements, we want everything right now, right? We don't want to go through the time part of it. But if you look at neuroscience, a lot of people think they're going to go to a workshop or watch a video or just read a book and then they're going to have it, right? Well, no, all you have is the information, which is crucial. Neurologically, here's what builds new circuitry and wiring in the brain. It's 4 things. Number 1, we have to have an awareness of what the issue is, what we're trying to do. I'm a competitive golfer. I would have to, my teacher would say, look, take the club back on this line, not that one. Well, I got to know what to do, right? Okay, but he can tell me that, and then I can go play in a tournament. I'm not any better yet. I just know what I'm supposed to be doing. Well, the second thing is we have to have focused attention on that particular thing in real time. So in other words, now I got to start hitting shots, and he's got to focus my attention when I take it back on the wrong angle or something, he goes, and that time you did this. And then he introduces the third component. I want you to do it this way instead. It's called deliberate practice. So we got awareness, we got focused attention on it in real time, and we got deliberate practice. And then the fourth component is we need relational support throughout the process. Okay, so what you've got is you got a process with particular components in it. It's exactly what the whole Bible describes. Moses said, put these on your forehead, on your breastplate, on the door, inside of your door. Talk about them as you're walking with your kids. And so we got to be going through life and doing it in a process. So that's kind of the thinking behind that, that this takes time. Well, you got to write a book. And so how long is the book going to be? Well, everybody's heard this whole thing. It takes 21 days to establish a habit. That's just not true. It takes longer than that. It just takes longer than that. I mean, if you can Google this stuff, but the best guesses are more towards the 90-day, aspect of it, because you got to get the wiring to grow. And we run on circuitry. We have brains that has hard wiring, and that hard neuroplasticity. Everybody's heard of it. You can change. You can grow. Everything about you can change, but you got to grow new wiring. And so, 90 days is safely into the window where if we really do something for 90 days, we are going to be different. And the other part of it, Ed, is to grow, we need structure. This is why you got up this morning probably, and, you, after whatever, you went in and brushed your teeth. Well, you didn't have a to-do list to do that. You just did it, right?
Yep.
You have become a toothbrusher.
for a long time.
Right. It's not something you have to do. Well, you weren't always that way. When you were, about, 2 years old or something, a little before that maybe even, you had a structure. We had get your jammies on time, brush your teeth time, story time, and you have a structure. And with that structure, think about a lattice when you're growing a vine or beautiful vine and bougainvillea, whatever it is you're growing. You plant it and you got a lattice, and the structure builds the plant in the direction. It's like braces on somebody's teeth. It guides the growth in a particular direction. We must have structure to develop anything new. This is why discipleship has to be structured in the early days. That's not legalism. That is growth. And so the other thing about a 90-day process is we're adding structure a little bit every day. Everybody knows, you got to, eat more of you need certain nutrients. Well, you can't go binge on that once. We don't grow a plant by dipping it in the dirt on a retreat once a year. It has to be planted in the soil, and there's got to be a structure to this. And so that's kind of another part of how we get to 90 days. And besides, I said there's thinking mind, and then there's not. Well, a book has to have pages, but how many pages? Well, it can't be too many, or you'd be selling a library. So
that's true.
Some of this is dictated. We're not
so 90
smart,
pages.
Dictated.
And that's sort of, it is structure where it has a biblical theme at the beginning, biblical text at the beginning, and then sort of different thoughts that flow from that. I say the title of the book is To Know Him, a 90-day invitation to come to God as you are. Earlier, I commended his book that we talked about last year, is Why I Believe, a Psychologist's Thoughts on Suffering, Miracles, Science, and Faith. So I love this new lane. Well, and I think it's a good thing. Yeah, what?
The funny thing about the lane is when I first came to faith in a deeper way in college and was going through all this discipleship, and I was, voraciously reading all sorts of theology and all this. I wanted to be a pastor, and I thought I was going to go to seminary, and
right.
and then God called me into psychology, and I was an accounting and finance major. I didn't know anything about psychology, but it's very clear. He told me, no, change your major and go into psychology. I was like Abraham leaving Ur. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew, and I write about that in the book, how it happened, but I knew I was supposed to do that. And so, if anybody's read any of my quote self-help books, they know that, they're all integrated with all sorts of, biblical themes and theology and all this kind of stuff. But they're basically books in that space we called, the psychological world, relationship and performance and, emotional traumas and pains and boundaries and all that stuff. And for decades, that feeling has never gone away. Can I just talk about God? I just want to talk about God. I don't want to talk about all this other stuff. So finally, but God always had me in this other path, and I get to preach every now and then, but I really love it.
I've heard you speak and preach. You bring a message. And I would tell you that, you started classes at the Talbot School of Theology back in the day. As the dean, I am ready to reactivate your student status, and we'll let you be a seminary grad and a pastor. But I think you're doing just fine without that. So, listen, we got to take a pause here. So hold on for just a second.
All right, and then I'm going to plug Biola for you.
Oh, you're nice. Okay, well, I should save time for that. So the book is To Know Him, a 90-day invitation to come to God as you are. Our guest is Dr. Henry Cloud. Again, the book is kind of framed around a series of devotionals, and we're joking that it's kind of a new lane. That's not a new lane. It sounds like an old lane that we're going back to, which I love as well. Let me thank our whole team, by the way, at Moody Radio. Karen Hendren's my producer. Merle St. James is our engineer. Lisa Jempty is our associate producer. And, of course, we normally thank someone who's manning the phones, but nobody's manning the phones today. We are a pre-recorded program. It gives us more time with our amazing guest, Dr. Henry Cloud. So stay with us. We're going to continue our conversation. We have one more segment to talk with Dr. Henry Cloud about his book, To Know Him, a 90-day invitation to come to God as you are. You don't want to miss it. Stay with us. Okay, we're back. Ed Stetzer Live. Henry Cloud. I just cut Henry Cloud off when he was about to say something nice. And so I am not going to stop you from saying something nice. Dr. Cloud, go for it.
Well, I was going to plug your great institution there. My undergrad I did at SMU in Dallas. And then when I was picking graduate schools, Rosemead Graduate School had just moved to Biola. And Rosemead was one of the only schools you get a doctorate in clinical psychology, but also it had, the theological track. And the theological is 120 something hours, class or course credits, hours, whatever you call those. It's a long program. It's 5 years. And but you get the equivalent of a master's in theology, basically, when you're at Rosemead. And that was taught at Talbot. And so when it says took classes at Talbot, really it's sort of like, it's more than a few classes. It was like
right. No, it's not like one or two. Yeah.
No, but the thing about Biola, and especially now we're decades later, the comprehensive, the entree into so many different fields, but you're there and you're thinking through things with faith, as the foundation of it all. And I wouldn't trade anything for my education in psychology that I got at Biola, because I had that dual track of it was the psychology, and in the best my training in psychology was so good. APA approved program. That's a big deal that they fought hard for. But I had all the theology from Talbot, and it was just fantastic.
No, you're very kind. APA, by the way, is American Psychological Association. That's a secular accreditation that a Christian university, as you said, fought hard for. And so, again, the very, very kind of you. I should say my daughter is actually going into clinical psychology. She's graduating with an undergraduate degree. She's applied to several PhD programs. So she's following Dr. Henry Cloud's footsteps, and I'm quite proud and tickled of her. I don't know. She might end up going to Rosemead. We'll see where she ends up going. That's one of the places she's trying to figure. But and again, it is interesting.
Her dad could probably get her a good deal there, couldn't he?
No, I don't know that works that way. So, it's interesting. Like a few decades ago, I don't know, Christian psychologists kind of became the high priests of evangelicalism. Kind of goes through cycles sometimes where, and then and I think
that's really sad too. We can talk about that, but go ahead.
But you know what I'm talking about. You remember these seasons, but I do think there's some really good things, because I think a lot of times, pastors and psychologists, there was a big chasm between them, and and there, in times past, according to the new, I think it's the DSM-5, you actually treat somebody in accordance with their Christian faith. I don't know the exact language, but that's a psychological book, by the way, so people might not be familiar. But I think it's interesting to see that we're at a place now where pastors and counselors, therapists, psychologists seem to work more readily together. This idea of, because just having somebody isolated talking to a counselor, that doesn't accomplish all that we want. But also there are times we need more. How have you seen, I know this is not the theme of the book. The book is To Know Him, a 90-day invitation to come to God as you are. But you're integrating psychology and Bible and all that in the devotional. So how have you seen us progress or not progress on seeing ourselves as partners in serving people?
Well, oh gosh, Ed, you've kind of asked my life mission.
I did right here in like one and one segment remaining. We have like 10 minutes. Good. If you can explain it. Oh no, we have 5.5 minutes. You got to explain it all. Go.
All right. When I first went into this, and this was, decades ago, I walked into this field at that time when it was a war. I mean, a war. You had big name pastors writing books about anti-counseling and anti-psychology and then you had the psychologists over there, feeling sort of victimized by the church because they're just trying to help people. And so then these schools emerged that there was a phrase, the integration of psychology and theology. Well, that never made any sense to me. It just didn't, because at that time people say, well, you got an emotional problem, you send them to the Christian psychologist. But if it's a spiritual problem, you send them to the pastor. And I go, wait a minute. No, there aren't two worlds out there. There was one creation. There was one fall where everything went haywire. And there's one gospel. We don't have a psychological gospel and a spiritual gospel. We have one act of redemption, and we have one gospel. Ed, if you analyze Job's counselors, Job's friends, you analyze their sermons, it's like a walk through a Christian bookstore. What do they say? If you knew his precepts better, if you had more faith, if you got the sin far away from you, if let righteousness be your shield, all this stuff. And Job said to them, you're worthless counselors. I wish you would shut up. That's a paraphrase.
It is a paraphrase.
And there was more. And so then I'm working in all these clinical settings, right? And I'm learning and I'm seeing eating disorders healed. People say, well, I'm always going to have it, and I got to cope. No, I saw people that were bulimic getting well and have a normal relationship with food and all these things getting healed. And I was going, wait a minute, but this isn't, quote, the Christian way. And then I started stepping back, and I took 2 years, Ed, basically, where I dropped out of life and all I read was the Bible. But that time having some real life experience doing this. And Ed, I can't describe it other than when I read the scriptures, everything that was healing people was right there in the Bible all along, and in places I never heard this stuff. You never hear these passages talked about. And I could not believe it, that what we're talking about is one reality. And the psychologists who were over here doing really, really good things and people were getting well, even if they were secular, they were doing God's ways, his truth, his design, the things that are prescribed throughout the Bible. They were doing those. And so to say, wait a minute, that's not psychology. That's God's ways, the design. I can take any psychologist, and if they're doing something that is good, that's healing, I can take you to the chapter and verse to show you what that is. I remember a guy came to me one time, and he's kind of angry, and he had his 16-year-old son. And he said, I want you to help my son. And I said, what's the problem? He said, well, first of all, I got to know, are you a Christian psychologist or are you just a psychologist? I want a Christian psychologist, rah, 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 rah. And I said, well, yeah, I am, but why do you ask? He said, well, I went to this other psychologist, and he didn't use the Bible. I said, well, what did he tell you? He said, my son's problem was about my anger, but I want somebody that uses the Bible. I said, would it have helped if he had just read from Ephesians or Colossians, says, fathers, don't provoke your children to wrath. Fathers, don't dishearten your children. He told you what the Bible says, but you don't know your Bible. If you had known that. Anyway, don't get me started. There's one reality. We fall and God has the answer. And psychologists a lot of times take God's answers, the good ones, and they go deep. Like an accountant goes deeper than your financial course in church might. But the good ones are doing what the scriptures say too. They just know a lot of deep stuff, how to apply that.
Dr. Henry Cloud's been our guest. The book is To Know Him, a 90-day invitation to come to God as you are. Henry, we appreciate you. You challenge us. You make us think. We're always encouraged by your work. Again, go to edstetzerlive.com and you can you can link to more information about Henry. Also, to find a copy or a link to the book To Know Him, a 90-day invitation to come to God as you are, and all of Henry's books, which again have sold over 20 million copies. So again, thanks as always for listening to Existential Live. We appreciate you. And remember that we're here each and every Saturday at this time where we have conversations with different topics. Sometimes today it's about devotionals and spiritual growth. Sometimes about engaging the cultural moment. Different topics. Remember that Ed Stetzer Live is a production of Moody Radio, and Moody Radio is a ministry of Moody Bible Institute. And to our listeners, thank you as always for listening. And remember, you can always download the podcast as well at edstetzerlive.com. Thanks for listening.